Good morning. So do we have a bunch of new boxing fans now in the room after that wonderful clip we saw in the service?
I like wrestling.
I didn't ask about wrestling.
I used to box.
Did you?
Peaches and pears out in Southern California.
I'm sure it would shock nobody that there is a professional boxer in my family's past,
Wow.
because I am such a boxer kind of guy, you know. Have you heard of Ezzard Charles, former world champion heavyweight boxer from Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Cobra? Nobody's heard of Ezzard Charles.
I've heard of Rocky.
What year was this?
It was in the early 40s, maybe.
And 50s too.
Anyway, I had an uncle. My uncle Ted was a professional boxer, and he was one of Ezzard Charles's sparring partners. True story. So, but if you knew Uncle Ted later, you would never know it. That was part of his life that was over. He was a big guy, strong guy. Nice, very nice man.
Guys
He was a
in
boxer.
that era and in the 30s boxed.
Yeah.
That was kind of it was a sparring thing, yeah. A lot of
But
Irish guys.
you can look him up on the internet. He's got a little record of his professional bouts. It's just, I was shocked when I guess my mom told me, well, you know, he used to be a professional boxer. No way. He just, yeah.
So he was a boxer named Ted.
Yeah, Ted Nichols. My
Well,
Uncle Ted.
The marketing just writes itself.
Does it?
Cause Teddy Bear boxing bear.
Teddy Bear.
No one sees the market.
You're thinking of Max
that.
Bear, I guess, huh?
One thing about George Foreman, he's a professing Christian and
And all his sons.
also in the Indies, Marvin Johnson, he's got a jail ministry.
Yeah.
Undefeated light heavyweight champion.
Right. Anyway, enough boxing.
No, I'm not much of a fan of boxing.
I'm not either. I did just, you know, that wasn't much of a clip to watch if you want to. Of course, but this does also give me a chance to trot out one of my favorite quotations of all time from Mike Tyson, because it's so applicable
Here we
to
go.
everyday life.
We're ready.
Well, it is. And Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Right.
Oh, Mike Tyson. He was a
You can buy a T-shirt with that on it. I might do that one of these days. All right, have I wasted enough time yet? Kevin's saying, we came back for this?
Mhm.
All right, we're going to look at 2 Samuel. We're going to, we did the first 8 verses of chapter 19 last week. We're going to do the rest of chapter 19 today. And we're back in, and it's just, and this is more about, there's a big cast of characters, so to speak, in the chapter today. A lot of people doing a lot of different things, making a lot of decisions. There's a lot going on. And the one thing that strikes me about it, or that struck me about it, is that everybody's got options on everybody has a lot of choices on what they can do at this point in David's story. You know, they can go this way, they can go that way. And it's interesting to think about as we read through this. To what extent is or isn't God involved in any of this, or is anybody calling on God to help them decide on what's going to happen throughout this chapter? So I'm going to go ahead and read the chapter, and then we'll get into discussion. 2 Samuel chapter 19, verse 9. We'll start. So, well, this is right after Absalom. You know, Joab kills Absalom, and David falls to pieces, and Joab has to kind of talk some sense into him, say, "You're the king. You need to, you know, do what you're supposed to do as a king. I understand you're his father, but you're a king also. So you need to get out of this funk you're in, these hysterics, and act like a king. So he does that. So verse 9. Find it. Throughout the tribes of Israel, the people were all arguing with each other, saying, "The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He is the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines, but now he has fled the country because of Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back?" The tribes of Israel, these are the 10 tribes. Judah and Simeon are the other 2 tribes that kind of stuck with David through this recent insurrection that Absalom was leading. So when verse 9 says the tribes of Israel are all arguing with each other, these are the people that backed Absalom. These are the 10 tribes that backed the losing side. Verse 11, King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. "Ask the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king at his quarters? You are my brothers, my own flesh and blood, so why should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if from now on you are not the commander of my army in place of Joab." He won over the hearts of all the men of Judah as though they were one man. They sent word to the king, "Return, you and all your men." Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. Remember, Shimei is the guy, as David and his entourage were leaving Jerusalem, he was the guy who was standing on the hill shouting curses at David as he was leaving. With Shimei were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and said to him, "May my lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind, for I, your servant, know that I have sinned, but today I have come here as the first of the whole house of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king." Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, "Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed." David replied, "What do you and I have in common, you sons of Zeruiah? This day you have become my adversaries. Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Do I not know that today I am king over Israel?" So the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die," and the king promised him on oath. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, "Why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth?" He said, "My lord the king, since I, your servant, am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it, so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever pleases you. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king, but you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king?" The king said to him, "Why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the fields." Mephibosheth said to the king, "Let him take everything now that my lord the king has arrived home safely." Barzillai, the Gileadite, also came down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and to send him on his way from there. Now Barzillai was a very old man, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. Then the king said to Barzillai, "Cross over with me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you." But Barzillai answered the king, "How many more years will I live that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I'm now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what is good and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks?" Can I still hear the voices of men and women singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance. But why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town near the tomb of my father and mother. But here is your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king. Do for him whatever pleases you. The king said, Kimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him whatever pleases you. And anything you desire from me, I will do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and gave him his blessing, and Barzillai returned to his home. When the king crossed over to Gilgal, Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. Soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan together with all his men? And the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, we did this because the king is closely related to us. Why are you angry about it? Have we eaten any of the king's provisions? Have we taken anything for ourselves? Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king, and besides, we have a greater claim on David than you have. So why do you treat us with contempt? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the men of Judah responded even more harshly than the men of Israel. So a lot of weird stuff going on here. So the first thing, and we don't, nobody really knows for sure how long, at what point in time this is happening after Absalom's death and the victory, David's victory. You know, we don't know if it's the day after, if it's a week after, if it's a couple months, exactly how long this is after all of the events of chapter 18. But it's been long enough that now the tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, they're all kind of talking to each other saying, well, they've got a lot of choices. Or what do we do here? What are we supposed to do? We back the losing side. So I guess we need to kind of make nice with David, don't we? Because he did, in the past, he saved us from the Philistines and he beat the guy we appointed leader over us. So maybe we should say something. Maybe we should invite him back to be the king again. It's and some, I don't know. They're kind of in a dilemma here because, have you ever backed the losing side in something and then you lose and then you've got to go back and kind of curry favor with the winning side? I don't know. I was trying to think of an example. I couldn't come up with anything good because I've never backed the losing king. I voted for the wrong guy for president sometimes, but that's a little different.
Well, that could be a problem.
Yeah.
Heather?
Well, can't you kind of think of an idol? Maybe you make an idol of something and then you realize that you've been pursuing something that has been not of value and
Yeah, that's good.
you have an epiphany about it. That's happened to me.
Well, and that makes, Absalom, he was the young, good-looking, head full of hair, matinee idol kind of guy, and maybe they all just fell for him because he was a good-looking guy. Jeremiah?
Maybe you idolize a person and meet them in person and they come to find out they're messed up in the head.
That can happen, yeah. So it could, and that I like that. That's good. That maybe sometimes we kind of lose sight of what we're supposed to be following because we're following the latest trendy thing or the latest good-looking leader. I don't know.
Lose sight of what's important.
So anyway, the tribes of Israel, they're talking about themselves, and word of this gets back to David. Now David has several options here too. He's the king. He knows the king. He's been anointed the king. He could just march right back into Jerusalem and say, I'm still the king. I always was the king, and just kind of force his way in. But he chooses not to do that. He kind of wants to Hmm?
He wants to be asked.
Yeah, he wants to be invited in. And throughout a lot of this, what happens here in the chapter, I think a lot of this isn't so much David being the anointed king of Israel, anointed by God, as David the politician. I think there's a lot of politics going on here. In how he deals, because he's dealing with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different factions here. He's kind of trying to himself where he's and it works. He goes to the people of Judah, says, "Hey, these people, this tribes, they were fighting against me, and they've already asked me to be the king again. What's taking you guys so long?" So maybe he's playing on their emotions. Say, well, yeah, I guess maybe we should. Maybe we should be asking him to be back. And then so he's kind of playing, but it's a good point. He's waiting to be asked. He doesn't want to force things. Maybe it's better sometimes to wait and persuade people, however covertly you can do it. Maneuver to where you're asked to do something, to where you're invited to do something, and not force yourself in a situation where that might turn some people off. So he works through the priests, and then he's got to deal with Joab. Well, he thinks he's got to deal with Joab, and this won't be the last time. But it's interesting in verse 13. He sends a message to Amasa: "Are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me ever so severely, if from now on you are not the commander of my army in place of Joab." Well, Joab's his flesh and blood too. They're both his nephews. Amasa and Joab are cousins. So it's an interesting way he characterized that. Why would he say, "Well, you're my flesh and blood," when Joab's his flesh and blood as well?
I think you're right in saying there's politics going on here, but I think that he is trying to smooth over the losing faction here and the warring faction, because Amasa was in charge of Absalom's army.
Yeah.
And so even though he was David's nephew, he took a position of trying to take David out. So I don't know that I can point to a situation where the leader of the losing army gets put in charge of the winning army's troops.
Yeah.
I can't think of a time, but it seems like David is trying to smooth over all the things that have happened here, try to calm the rippled waters and get everything back in terms of because typically what happens in these situations when there is an insurrection and somebody is ousted, but that person wins, is they come back and the leader of the army on the opposite side usually gets executed.
Right.
Yes.
He's doing just the opposite.
Right. That's it. He was the leader of the opposition's army. So either David, well, maybe a variety of things. Either David, maybe God is telling David to do this. Maybe David just is such a judge of character and personalities that he knows he can do this, and it's a way to try to help persuade the 10 tribes that to go ahead and make peace, make nice, and coexist peacefully again. Because hey, I appointed your general to be my general, and I got rid of my own general.
Yeah, probably the closest thing I can think of it in terms of history is at the end of the Civil War, where there were, the South loses, and there were a lot of people who called for people like Robert E. Lee to go on trial for treason, and they really wanted him hung. And there were people like Grant who stepped in and said, "No, we're not going to do that, because if we do that, we're going to lose the South all over again."
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to forgive him. Okay, we're just going to let him go off, and he's going to become the president of a college, and And we're gonna let him go off and do that and live in peace. And we're just gonna say enough's enough. And there were a lot of people that had hard feelings about that, but there were also people who were very relieved because
Yeah.
he's probably right.
Yeah.
If you take the leaders and you wanna hang them all, well, what are you gonna have? You're gonna have another insurrection on your hands. Grassroots.
Yeah, and that's a good example. And, you know, and you know, the Confederate soldiers were allowed to keep their horses. They were allowed to keep their rifles, whatever they had,
So
because they would need that.
Right.
To go back to a normal life. And, you know, part of that though is, and maybe I'm getting off track here, but it's an interesting question. Part of that though is General Lee, Robert E. Lee, and the other Confederate leaders and the soldiers in general, they were all willing to recognize that what they should do, they had a role to play as well. They were let go, but they didn't go turn around and try and start the whole war over again. They understood that they had a different thing to do at that point. They had to move on and let that go.
some did, some didn't.
Yeah.
So we got the Ku Klux Klan.
I think didn't Robert E. Lee, I think I mentioned before, it's, some kind of relation to my mother's side of the family. Didn't he admit that the South made a mistake, you know, in starting the whole thing? I mean, I think he did because he was a Christian man, and but he was a Virginian, and he felt like he had to go with. And Virginia was part of the Confederacy, so
Could be. I don't know off the top of my
I
head.
can't remember that in history whether he ever admitted that the whole Confederacy was wrong in the first place. But he accepted, with humility, he accepted the laws, you know. I mean,
Yes. Yeah. All right. So anyway, so David, I mean, to me, he's a master politician here. He's soothing over ruffled feathers. He's trying to make peace among all these different interests. You know, by pointing out that Amasa is his own flesh and blood, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't recognize that Joab is still his flesh and blood as well, but he's just not going to worry about it at this point. He's just got to replace Joab for a couple of reasons, because he's got to deal with Joab, and he's got to welcome the Israelites back, the tribes of Israel back into the nation. Because in verse 14 says he won over the hearts of all the men of Judah as though they were one man. So they say, "Come on back, return you and all your men." The king returned and went as far as the Jordan. So Shimei shows back up again, and he does what? He confesses. Now, does he confess because he's really feeling contrite, or because he's trying to save his skin, or both? A little of both, maybe. We don't. I don't think there's any way to really know. But he's not shy about showing how contrite he is. You know, I said what I shouldn't have said. I did all these. You know. But you know, we talk every so often about David. A lot of what David does is reminiscent of Jesus. Isn't Shimei asking David to do what we're always asking Jesus to do for us? He's asking David to forgive him. When Shimei, he obviously, you know, was crossing, you know, he was arguing against David. He was cursing him. He was just doing all kinds of terrible things. And then he turns around and asks for forgiveness. And he says, where is it here? May my Lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong. Is that not what Jesus does for us? Does he not? I mean, we're always told it's like your sins have never happened. They've been washed away. They never happened. That's what Shimei is asking David to do. He's saying, don't Don't even remember what I did.
Whether he was trying to save his own skin or he was really contrite and he felt bad about what he was doing, does it matter from David's perspective? He forgave him, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't that what God does for us? Are we trying to save our skin by confessing? Or are we really contrite and feeling bad about what we did?
Well,
And does he forgive
you
us?
have to ask each one of us that question.
I guess,
Yeah.
okay. I'll
Well,
start with
God's
you.
God's got the insight to know our heart.
Right,
David doesn't
right.
necessarily.
Right.
I mean, he may be very discerning.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know a person's heart the same way God does.
Yeah,
It kind of reminds me of Jesus' parable of the prodigal son, who ran out of options and then came back, spent all the money, was eating with the pigs, decided,
yeah,
I've run out of options. I'm going to go back and confess before my father. And the older son got angry at that because the kid didn't deserve it. He didn't, but God forgave him anyway.
mhm.
Just
But
like,
David said, mind your own business.
what's that?
He turned around and said, mind your own business, the guy who didn't like it.
Well, we'll get
You
to
know,
that.
just mind your
We're
own
getting there.
business. Stay out of it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, whether David actually thinks he's contrite or it's just for show, it doesn't really, to David, the politician, does it even matter? I don't think it would even matter. David sees a chance to make nice with another potential problem. He's got a chance to put another fire out that could be simmering, yeah.
I agree with you about the politician part, but I also would look at it in terms of maybe in wisdom, sometimes wisdom, there's so much wisdom in being patient, giving time, not
Mhm.
speaking when you don't need to speak. Just letting things kind of, in praying through things. And I would say that, there's a possibility that David's also doing some of that with the not jumping on, it's time for me to come back. Yes, he's a politician and, but I also think that hopefully he's using some wisdom and praying through what his next moves are. And sometimes I do think it's the wise move to not move too fast, let God open the doors, give you peace and take a step and then you feel the peace and you just keep moving in that direction. And
Mhm. Yeah, good. All right, let me throw one more wrinkle in this though. David's in verse, where am I here? Verse 22, David, in response to Shimei, says, verse 23, so the king said to Shimei, you shall not die, and the king promised him on oath. But if you look forward at 1 Kings chapter 2, First Kings chapter 2, when the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. Skip down to verse 8. And remember, you have with you Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, who called down bitter curses on me the day I went to Manaheim. When he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. But now do not consider him innocent. You are a man of wisdom. You will know what to do to him. Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood. What's up with that? Is this more problematic David stuff? I mean, he tells Shimei, you shall not die. I shall not put you to death. So he tells his son to put him to death. Is that his way to work around the oath? That doesn't seem right. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. Yeah, Jeremiah.
You say he's a politician, right?
He is a politician. Yeah.
Loopholes are kind of their specialty.
Yeah.
Well, just for some of them, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And
But
I
Yeah.
was gonna say, in the notes in my Bible, it says Mosaic law prohibited cursing a ruler.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Prohibited what, I didn't hear.
Cursing the ruler. Yeah, which is why in verse 21, Abishai says, shouldn't he be put to death?
yeah.
Yeah, by regulation, yeah, he should have been killed. He
But
should have
he
been killed
didn't.
long ago.
Well, Abishai tried to do it before.
Yeah.
He went to go cut his head off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But David
And
said,
he's
"Don't
still
do it."
wanting to do it.
Yeah, he's still wanting to do it.
And another interesting thing about that, David's response to Abishai in verse 22, he says, what do you and I have in common? You sons of Zeruiah.
Mhm.
I mean, the only other son of Zeruiah is Joab. Is he there too? I'm assuming they're both there, and he's kind of talking to them both at the same time, as if, here's one more thing. I'm just tired of dealing with the two of you. Why don't you just shut up and leave me alone? I don't need any more of your advice or something. I don't know. This day you have become my adversaries. So anyway, it's a strange interchange between David and Shimei. And David makes this oath that he won't be killed. And then however much later, he tells his son to bring his head down in blood. I don't.
He doesn't say you will never die. Does he mean you're not gonna die today? He doesn't really promise that it won't ever happen.
Well,
Loophole.
Loophole, yes.
when did you go to law school?
Correspondence course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mhm.
It's just one of those, another mystery
Right.
of the Bible. Jeremiah, do you have something? You were stretching. Okay. All right. So it's a little. We have a few questions about that, and then Ziba is there as well, who previously told David that Mephibosheth was rooting against David, and so David had given everything that was Mephibosheth's to Ziba. So Mephibosheth, and they're both there. I just like to picture them both standing side by side, both of them arguing, presenting their side of the story to David, face to face. So to his credit, Mephibosheth says, well, let me back up a second here. David asks Mephibosheth why he didn't come with him, and Mephibosheth says, and it's an interesting answer. He says, well, I'm lame and I was going to ride my donkey. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me. He doesn't explain why that prevented him from riding his donkey to go out with David. But apparently it did. So David says, well, okay, then just divide up everything. And Mephibosheth says, well, I don't really want any of that. I'm just happy you're back and you're alive. And so Ziba can have everything. And that kind of reminded me, looking forward to, Solomon's case with the two women claiming to be the mother of the baby. And Solomon says, well, just divide up the baby. Here David says, well, just divide up everything and then you'll both be happy, right? And Mephibosheth is the one who says, no, I don't want any of that. So that kind of argues in his favor, doesn't it? Seems like it. Yeah. But so I guess he's telling the truth, but we don't really know for sure again. If he's telling the truth, if Mephibosheth really is telling the truth, and if David is such a good judge of what's what and such a good judge of character, why is he giving Ziba anything? Why is Ziba getting anything out of this? He ends up with everything after lying to David. He's offered half. Mephibosheth says, I don't want any of it. Give it to Ziba. So Ziba walks away with everything after lying to David.
Well, I think Siba's smooth, manipulative.
Okay.
I mean, you notice he's all connected. He's got lots of sons, and he was right there at the very beginning with Shimei and 1,000 Benjaminites to come and meet David. And he's a very smart man. I think he's hard to tell, but I think
Could
that's
be.
my take on him.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's a nice reminder that, yeah, Shimei and Ziba and their entourage, they're the first ones there. They're making a big show of and they say, we're the first ones here. That counts for something, doesn't it? Because we're so anxious to beg your forgiveness and show we were wrong and confess and all of this stuff. So for whatever reason, and again, I don't have an answer, Ziba, if he's lying, he walks away with a nice profit. And if he's telling the truth and Mephibosheth is lying, well, Mephibosheth kind of gets away with it as well. Although he doesn't have any, he has given away everything he wanted, everything he had. So I don't know. These are just strange interactions that David's having to deal with. And again, it's as part of being the king, I guess, at the time. So anyway, let's move on to Barzillai, which is a much more rewarding part of the chapter. Barzillai, he's an old man. He, if you remember when, what?
The names.
Oh, Barzillai? Barzilla. Yeah, I keep thinking Barzilla.
Godzilla.
Now, see, it's making me think of pasta.
Well, that's true. When David had to leave Jerusalem, Barzillai was one of those he provided support to David and all the people leaving Jerusalem. Basically provided them food and all kinds of stuff because he's a wealthy man, but he's more than happy to share it to help out, which is kind of a nice thing to see. And the other nice thing about Barzillai, when David offers him the opportunity to go with David, to live with him in Jerusalem, to enjoy the pleasures of the palace or whatever. He says, I'm 80 years old. What am I going to get out of it? What's in it for me? Not much. I don't, my taste buds are gone. I can't hear anything. There's nothing there that I would enjoy. I'm old enough. I know myself. I don't need any of these things. Just let me go back. Let me go with you a little ways. Let me cross the river with you. And then I'm happy to go home. Because that's what's going to suit me the best now. He's honest with David. That says, this is just where I am in my life. Now, if you want to, take my son, he doesn't say it's his son, but I'm assuming it's his son, Kimham. If you want to take him along in my place, I would appreciate that. He's looking out for his son. He doesn't need any of this stuff, but Kimham maybe can benefit from it and help set him up, in his life as a resident of David's palace and whatever benefits that can get him over through the years. So Barzillai is willing to admit, where he is, who he is, what he needs, what he doesn't need, and he's honest. He's wealthy. He shares his wealth to what he thinks are the right reasons to help the right people out. Overall, he's one of the good guys in this whole messy thing.
Do you think, in contrast to the other people that we've talked about prior in this chapter, that maybe Barzillai is the one guy that David trusts, looks up to, feels like he's not in it for himself? Everybody else seems to want something from David. Everybody else seems to want to curry favor because what can I get out of it?
Yeah.
But he's the one guy that seems like, David, I'm not here to gain anything from you. And even what you're offering me, thank you very much. If you feel like you need to give it to somebody, give it to my son. I'm going to go back home. I just want to make sure you got here safely.
Yeah.
That's all I was really concerned about.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, David, maybe he's recognizing he's the one guy he probably could use at his palace, maybe for advice or, just a little bit of common sense now and then. So, and because that's the one guy he invites to come with him. He doesn't tell Mephibosheth, you can come with me. He doesn't say Shimei can come with me. He doesn't say anybody else can come with me, except Barzillai, the one guy who probably is going to be honest, would be honest with him, and give him an honest opinion. So yeah, that's a good point. Be that as it may, he says, nah, that's just not, that won't work. I'm not going to do that. Thank you though. So let's see, where are we?
Number 6, I think.
Yeah, number 6, the allegiance of the men of Israel. So verse 41, we'll move down here. Soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan together with all his men? So why? So they're still making a distinction between them and Judah. They're not yet recognizing that, well, we're reunited now. We're all one nation under David. They're still seeing it. They're still seeing an us and them kind of arrangement. Which is interesting. And then, like, they say, we have a greater claim on David than you have, which, because there's 10 tribes there against 2 tribes. I guess that's the reason they're saying they have a greater claim. I mean, what tribe is David from? He's from Judah, right? We have 10 shares in the king, and besides, we have a greater claim on David than you have. So to them, it's still us and them. Besides, we were the first to speak of bringing back our king. Why do you treat us with contempt? So they're kind of saying, well, we're in this even more than the men of Judah were. We were the first to invite him back. There's more of us. We were the first. Not to get ahead of the lesson, but it's the next chapter, right? That, well, their allegiance lasts one whole chapter. A little preview there. Anyway, it's interesting that, and you wonder, and I didn't get a chance to look into this as much as I wanted to, about, as we move into the future and the nation of Israel is divided into the 2 kingdoms. How far back do you go to where that division starts taking root? Where are the seeds to that division starting? And I can't help but think this is part of it, that they're recognizing that they are separate from Judah. Israel and Judah are separate things. That even after they have one king, they're still seeing themselves as separate. So that to me, I think is part of it, if not the main part of it. And we'll get into that in the future. So so where is God in all this? Who's asking God about anything in this?
Mm.
And I seem to have asked this question a lot in the last few chapters. We've dealing with the events of David's life. God kind of comes and goes. He's kind of, sometimes they ask him, sometimes they don't. And it's kind of like, it also is somewhat, to me, it's reminiscent of, in the time of the judges. I mean, Israel was united and they're doing things the right way, and then they're down, then they're up, then they're down. Here some of them are following Absalom, some of them are following David, they're down, then they're back together. And then next week they're going to be back apart again. It's the same thing. Even with, they asked for a king, they got the king, they got Saul, and that didn't work out. Then they got a king anointed by God that they can't seem to follow. They can't all seem to agree on either. So it's just one mess after another. And that's
No consistency.
Well, they're consistently inconsistent, right?
The consistent, the consistent inconsistency.
So there's, yeah, like I say, to me, this chapter, it's just all politics to me, pretty much. It's David doing what he thinks he needs to do to smooth over ruffled feathers, to reunite people, at least to the point where they're going to be able to coexist peacefully and get along. He's appointing commanders to this and that, even though they were fighting against him. All these things seem to be geared to let's get everybody reunited and back on the same page. Heather, did you have?
Oh, it just seems like it's, even if we're making the right choices and things, we can have so many hardships, so much suffering today. I mean, it's just the drama, what people do, and, how people treat you, all of none of us are immune from suffering and the ups and downs and the frustrations of life that are related to living this side of heaven.
Some
Right.
of us think we are.
It also
Chris?
shows me that people do better in small groups than they do in large groups. There's not as much effectiveness when you've got one ruler over everybody. It's better that there's some rulers with agreement to the one ruler that can have smaller groups. And I think that's consistent with today, even in a large church.
Right.
Yeah.
There's people that just go to church. Well, they lose out if they're not in a small group or have some companionship with other Christians during the week, during the month,
That's right.
during the year. They scatter.
Yeah.
Because they're, they just go to church. And they sit there and they don't really participate in anything.
Right. Yeah.
So it's easier if you have some agreement within the small groups.
Yeah, it's easier. There's more accountability. Yeah, good. So, and so, yeah, there's a lot of politicking. David's doing a lot of this, a lot of that, but I mean, maybe he's done as well as anybody could do. I mean, let's look at the alternatives. What if he hadn't replaced Joab? What if he had just marched right back into Jerusalem and maybe, like Kevin's example of General Lee after the Civil War, maybe there would have been more people from the tribes of Israel maybe it would have been worse than it turned out. Maybe more people would have resented him than actually did. We don't know, but it's part of it seems to be David trying to make the best of a tough situation, and maybe this was the best he could do. Who knows?
A lot of it just has to do with the old sin of pride,
Yeah.
The 10 tribes seem to, wouldn't accept Judah, David being of the tribe of Judah. They didn't really seem to want to forgive him, like they could have. And, it's one part of Israel, having pride over another, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Pride is a big sin.
They were focused on their differences and why they were better than the other part instead of seeing where they were all needed to be together. Yeah, that's right. That's what I got. Such an uplifting story again. All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll be on our way. Dear God, thank you for your word. Thank you for this class. Some of this is tough stuff to figure out what we need to take from it, but we note your absence from this narrative, and maybe that's our reminder to not make decisions, to make choices, to do things without you being present and without you being invited into these things that we're involved in. So be with us this week. Keep us all safe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Hey, God,
Yes.
earlier when you were talking about the inconsistency of the people,
Mhm.
as a millennial, I hear Katy Perry going, "You're hot and you're cold, you're yes and you're no, you're
Okay.
That's fun.
Something to go with
No,
it
it's a
all,
song to go with it.
everything.
She one of the Spice Girls.
I learned it myself, yeah.
Trying to break the Christian music world.
She's trying to now.
She was.
What's the Tennessee Waterfall they gotta ask?
Maybe.
And
Oh,
couldn't make it.
we actually visited the waterfall.